The next item that we're looking at now is item number 4. Am I correct on that? To hear a report on the pension actuarial study. And I believe we have Bob Malarkey here. Is that, I'm sorry? Is Bob Mayer doing it? Which one are we doing? Bob Mayer. David, we're doing pension actuarial, right? That's what you would. Yep. Bob Mayer. I apologize.
Not a problem.
Okay. Actually, let me get my thing out here. Give me a second. Let me sit down. You need this? I'm going to get mine.
All right. Pardon? No. Hello? Can you hear me? Awesome, great. I'm Bob Mayer, for those of you who don't know me. We are here to talk about the implications and designs of the differences between defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans, and hybrid plans. You've already met Tim Ryer, who's a partner, Senior VP with Hooker and Holcomb, who worked with me to put this together. Couple of initial comments. Dealing with pension plans and actuarial science is not really rocket science. Rocket science is based upon the principles of math and physics and sciences. Actuarial plan design is based upon math, science, art, economics, and driven by emotion. So it gets a little bit more confusing. Also, it's important as you listen to the presentation tonight to understand that there's really no straightforward answer to a lot of the questions because, as Tim indicated earlier, it's very complex, and a correct answer for one situation may not be the correct answer for another situation. If you were to compare a specific DB plan with a specific DC plan, defined benefit plan, with the defined contribution plan for one population, and then take the same two plans and apply it to a separate, distinct population. In one situation, the DP plan might cost the employer more, and in the other situation, the DC plan might cost the employer more. So it's very dependent upon the variables related to the population. Those variables are age, how long the people are in their jobs, their wages, how long they work, do they retire early, do they retire late. There's a multiplicity of others. There are 27 slides in this presentation. I did not make copies. I did not want to produce 2,000 pages to bring tonight, but I'm assuming Mr. Steele emailed it out to all the members. Okay, with that, and we're going to piggyback on each other a little bit. I'm starting off. You see the first slide here is basically retirement plan basics. We're going to talk about DB plans. We're going to talk about DC plans. DB is defined benefit, DC defined contribution, and hybrid plans, which is a combination of a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan. We're going to compare the costs, how the costs are defined, how the costs are calculated, and how the costs are funded. We're going to talk about the impact of investment returns. A DC plan, investment returns has a zero impact on the contribution requirements of the employer or the town. DB plan, the investment returns are very significant. For those who have been involved in town government here for a long time or paying attention, you can remember there was a period of time because the investment returns were so high that this town made zero contributions to the retirement plan. I think it was like 7 or 8 or maybe 9 or 10 years. And then, of course, the market tanked, and then, as the gentleman mentioned earlier, who was speaking to the union contract, contributions have gone up significantly. Then we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the DB plan, both from an employer and employee perspective. Same thing for the DB plan, DC plan, and the hybrid plan. And then we're going to talk about what's the right design. And that's kind of a trick question because, as I indicated earlier, really there is no right design. What's right for one town, what's right for one employer is not necessarily the best solution for other towns, other employers. Defined benefit plan. That's what we currently have. We have a defined benefit plan. The employer makes a contribution. It's called the ARC, the annual required contribution, into the plan. It's basically an actuarial calculation. The employee generally also contributes to the plan, generally a fixed percentage of his or her salary. The benefits are usually a factor of years of service and average pay and what they call a multiplier. So I think our town plan, the multiplier is 2.275%. So when you retire with the right number of years, basically if you have 20 years in, it's 20 years times that 2.275%. It calculates your retirement. Since the employer, read the last one there, since the employer is providing a lifetime payment based upon a fixed formula, the investment earnings, as I indicated earlier, basically have no impact on the benefits that are paid. DC plan, the employer deposits a fixed percentage of pay into the employee account. The employee also contributes into the account. The employee's account varies with the investment results, and we'll talk about that in the, in the pros and cons a little bit more. The benefits received at retirement, you get the money. You get a lump sum payment, and you can take that, you can investment, you can buy an annuity, you can invest it, you can buy an annuity, you can do whatever you want with it. It's unlike the DC plan, the DB plan, where you have a life stream of pension payments on a monthly basis. The hybrid plan is basically a combination of the two. It gives you some of the benefits of and the disbenefits of each of the other two plans. I think, Tim, you can go from here, and I'll be back.
Find my place here. All right. Well, we wanted to highlight this point, and it was a good intro to some of the points earlier, talking about the cost of a DB plan, and these are going to be generic, not specifically related to your plan, but we wanted to, my understanding of this presentation was an education on what is a defined contribution, what is a defined benefit plan, what are the hybrid plans, what are the pros and cons of all these different kinds of pension designs. And to really understand the benefits, you need to understand how the benefits accrue and the value that's given to the employee. And we talked about before, that value could be paid for by investment returns, but it's very different under a defined benefit plan than a defined contribution plan. Under a defined benefit plan, the value that an employee accrues in any year changes due to three factors: increase in pay, obviously additional service year and one more year of service, and then the factor that's in a DB plan that's not in a defined contribution is this present value based on the investment return. Because you're guaranteeing this future pension, the value of what's earned is contingent on what are you going to assume is going to be paid for by investment returns. So, whoop, no, not yet, sorry. If you go. So the final point there hopefully is obvious, that if you earn less return, if less of the benefit is going to be paid for by investment return, then more of it needs to be paid for by the employer. Okay. So what we have here in a future slide is we want to give you a graphical representation so you could kind of visualize what does the accrual pattern of a DC plan look like compared to an equivalent DB plan. And this page here, it's got a lot of words on it. Basically, it's just disclosing that when we get to the later graph, we've got 3 designs that at the end of the period for this sample participant produce roughly the same lump sum. It's 509,000 if memory serves me. So you have these 3 different designs that are going to be equivalent, but we wanted to show you what does that look like. Actually, go to the next slide. Actually, I apologize. I got a little ahead of myself. I can't see these slides in the dark here. So we did, and just to give you a little of the background, it was a 2% multiplier, and we're showing the equivalent. Actually, go back. You roll it. This slide will kind of give you the idea of what is happening with those 3 factors: the change in average pay. So to look at the value, and this will make more sense when we get to the graph, but you have the average pay in the example that's increasing. You have the years of service increasing, so the pension is actually increasing, and then you have 1 more year of interest earned, so the total present value is going up by that as well. So under the DC, and I think Bob explained this pretty well, the DC, the costs are the cost. It's usually a fixed % of pay, so a 5% of pay DC plan costs the employer 5% of pay because they're putting that in an account, and the investment earnings are owned by the participant. So the town doesn't win or lose depending on investment return, which is very different from the DB plan, where positive investment returns help the employer, negative investment returns hurt the employer as far as total contributions. And then at the bottom there, the hybrid plan is just a blend of the 2. It's a way of maintaining some defined benefit by reducing some of the risks. Okay, the next slide is the one I thought we were on, related to describing the graph on the next page. So if we just go to the next one here. Now this is the one that kind of puts it in perspective for you. The yellow line is hopefully obviously the DC. It is going up. We've assumed this participant's pay is increasing with some salary scale over time, but you see it's gradually going. And the important thing to point out when you're talking about plan design changes is these are equivalent plans, and for the younger person makes out better in the early years in a defined contribution until you eventually reach a crossover point. So the blue line is the equivalent defined benefit, and you see what's happening there with both the increase in interest, the inflationary impact due to the increased salary, and then of course the increase in service. It's a very steep line. So the value of what you earn in a defined benefit plan starts out low, but it eventually catches up and overtakes the defined contribution plan. Again, it's important to point out that at the end of this period of service, the person in the DC plan and the person in the DB plan had the same benefit, the same total value, again, assuming a 7.5% return. We show the green line just as an example of what a hybrid might look like, and not surprisingly, since we did a 50-50, it kind of splits the difference. So what this looks like on the next page, that was the graph on the prior page was the year-by-year accruals. This is the accumulation, and you see under all 3 of them, again, the DC, you start out ahead, and under all 3 designs, and this was by design, that they all end up at the same, 509,000 roughly lump sum value at retirement age. But they follow very different accrual patterns, and that needs to be considered when you're talking about any kind of transition from defined benefit to defined contribution. So related to that, we've kind of hit this from different angles and talked a little bit about it already, but wanted to give you some numbers to kind of quantify this of what happens to the town's cost if you actually do earn a different investment return. And just a little background, and in the answer to the earlier question, we kind of went over this, but you have this thing called the ARC, which is the actuarial calculation that's what the town contributes to fund the plan, that has these different components. Under the actuarial method, certain liabilities are assigned to the past. That's compared to the assets. The difference is the unfunded liability. That's amortized. But then there's this forward-looking, that's the assignment of the value of the benefits earned in the current year, and that sometimes that's referred to as the service cost, or more commonly, the normal cost. And when we usually look at the normal cost when we're comparing designs and saying, what does this plan cost going forward? You can't really do anything about the unfunded accrued liability. That's a bill that has to be paid no matter what design you move to. And we'll get to that concept a little bit later in the presentation. So you want to look at the normal cost. But again, under a defined benefit plan, the normal cost varies depending on how much of it you think is going to be paid for by investment returns. So in this case, and actually we have a graph on the next page that shows you the difference. And in the top, you notice, is the same $1.4 million number. That's because under the design, as Bob pointed out when he was describing defined benefit plans, typically municipal defined benefit plans require the employees to contribute something. But that's a fixed percent of pay, very similar to a defined contribution plan. So that number is not going to change based on the investment returns. It's, built into the contracts that it is what it is. And so you see under the three scenarios there, 6.5%, 7.5%, or 8.5%. You see now right now that the town is moving to the middle 7.5% return, and that's why that one is shown. But you see that the dramatic difference, if more or less of that return is being paid by investment returns. That if you only earn 6.5, the cost goes up considerably. Alternatively, if you earn 8.5, the cost is going to go down. All right, so I'll turn it back over to Bob to go over some of the design pros and cons.
Okay, so theoretically at this point we're discussed the basics, the cost functions, the calculations, and the differences in the benefit design. So the point then comes, okay, we understand this, where do we go from here? What do we do? What works better for whom? For the employee, for the employer? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the employer's perspective for each of these and the employee's perspective for each of these. So starting with the defined benefit plan, because that's what we currently have, the pros are pretty obvious. The employer benefits, as we've discussed over and over again, from the investment gains. It's a very secure plan. It's a big safety net. So it can be a means, compared to a defined contribution plan, to enhance employee retention or to enhance employee recruitment. And it's also, as actually a question that was brought up with respect to the nurse's contract, it's also in a defined benefit plan, you normally have the disability calculation, the disability insurance factor included in the plan, whereas with the defined benefit contribution plan, I get my B's and C's mixed up, with the defined contribution plan, you have to go outside and shop for disability insurance. The cons from the employee's perspective. The employer bears 100% of the investment risk. There's a potential for future unfunded liabilities. The contributions can be volatile. This town has experienced that. We almost contributed nothing. We actually did contribute nothing, as I mentioned earlier, for several years, and now the contribution has gone up dramatically. The employer bears 100% of the longevity and inflation risk, specifically if it has a COLA. Our plans do have a COLA, a cost of living adjustment after retirement. In today's environment, employees who are looking to maybe move around, people move job to job more in today's economy, and well, maybe not today, but a couple of years ago. But there is more transition in employment. So someone who's thinking of moving, in a couple of years, the employer contribution plan is, gives them a quicker hit as pointed out when Tim was talking about the contribution curves. So younger employers may not appreciate the benefit of this kind of a plan. And again, we talked about the volatility. Um, Again, from the employee's perspective, the pros: guaranteed life income independent of investment returns, protected against longevity inflation, rewarded for long service, and the ancillary benefits of disability. Cons: employee does not benefit directly from investment gains, benefits are not portable. Employee or contribution plans, the benefits are portable from employer to employer. Employer provided retirement benefits are typically forfeited when the employee contributions are withdrawn. It disproportionately favors longer service. That is, the older people, the younger people don't appreciate that. As you can see, the pros and cons, the employer-employee, kind of the flip side of each other, and sometimes it's difficult to understand the true benefits. Defined contribution plan, employer's cost is a fixed percentage of payroll. Now, it may be higher than the defined benefit plan if the market is going up and the investment returns would take care of some of the contribution, or it may be lower. But the key here is it's fixed. You know what it's going to be. You can budget it in your budget every year for the next 10 years. You know it's 4% of payroll, 5% of payroll, 6% of payroll. So the costs are predictable, and there's no unfunded liabilities resulting from this type of a plan. Benefits are funded throughout the employee's career. Administration costs are typically paid for by the vendor, i.e. the mutual funds, the investment managers who manage the funds, and it's basically a very simple, easy-to-understand plan with respect to union negotiations. From the employer's perspective, the cons: employer does not benefit from investment gains, so not available to reduce costs. Typically requires providing disability. I mean, some of this stuff is repetitious and hinders recruiting efforts. From the employee's perspective, the pros: benefit is easy to understand. Employee can see the value of their account. You get a report every month, every quarter, every year. This is how much money is in your account. This is how much money you get if you leave today. This is going forward. Employee manages their own investment choices. Do I want it in emerging market funds? Do I want it in domestic equity funds? Do I want it in fixed income funds? You know, the employee controls the investment of their dollars. Employee benefits obviously increase with the investment gains. From the employee's perspective, the cons: no guaranteed lifetime income. Employee bears the investment risk as well as the investment gains, obviously. 20% asset drop equal 20% drop in benefits. No guaranteed protection for inflation or longevity. And since account balance is not likely to provide meaningful benefits in the event of death or disability, it's sometimes problematic. The hybrid is basically, as we discussed, has in both plans. You have the safety net, you have the guaranteed long-term income of the defined benefit plan, and from the employee side, but this is employer, so let me get back. Provides greater flexibility in plan design, provides partial reduction in contribution volatility. The cons, again, reduced benefits in each plan may not be appreciated because you see your defined benefit plan results, the number isn't as big as it would be in a full defined benefit plan. Then from the employee's perspective, which I kind of started out on the other one, I got these flip-flop, so I think it's clear though, and I'll give it back to Tim.
All right, so when you're doing plan design, you need to, and I think Bob covered this in his intro. I mean, the right plan depends on the answers to these questions, and they might vary by group. So you have to ask yourself, what is affordable? What is the right? And this really goes to that question, is a 10% of pay plan too rich? Should we design, so new hires have something that's 7 or 8% of pay? So you need to know what you need that prospective cost to be. What is the risk tolerance? If there's no tolerance for risk, then DB is always the wrong answer because, as we've pointed out, there's always risk involved in a defined benefit plan. From the employee standpoint, what is an adequate, benefit level? What are the employees looking for in the size of the benefit? One of the things we pointed out on the earlier slide, I don't know if we highlighted it, but the advantage of a defined benefit plan, it is an efficient way to provide a certain level of benefits. It's the most cost-effective way of doing that. So if your employees have a certain benefit expectation, whether defined benefit or maybe hybrid might be the right answer. What are the cost sharing arrangements? How much do you want something 50-50 or should it be 80-20? How much of the cost of the total plan should be paid by the employee versus the employer? And then, are there certain benefits that are necessary for retention and recruitment? Some groups might prefer DB. Some groups actually might move around more and actually prefer a defined contribution plan. There also might be certain ancillary benefits that particular groups are looking for. Disability in particular comes up a lot with public safety workers. Some additional considerations on the next slide. What are the drivers of the cost? Before moving forward to looking at changes, what are the drivers of the costs on the current plan? Is the multiplier big relative to other plans? The COLA, cost-sharing provisions? You want to analyze your current plan to see what are the drivers of the current costs. And again, we talked about this already, but are there some groups that would prefer a particular design? And you need to answer those questions really before you can move forward and pick. I mean, ultimately, the questions can be restated are, what should employees get, what should it cost, and who should bear the risk? Some final considerations I think it's important to point out, and we've alluded to this already, but any move to DC or any other design, it might just be a pared down DB plan, if it only applies to new hires, then there's not going to be a lot of short-term savings. Because one of the big drivers, obviously the increase in the ARC, as we discussed, is unfunded accrued liability. If new hires don't have accrued liability, so if you do something that only affects new hires, you're not really affecting that component of the cost of your plan. So significant short-term savings can only be achieved when plan design changes impact the current group of covered employees, benefit multiplier, COLA, et cetera. And obviously there's restrictions on that. And so we wanted to open it up. We do give some examples, but wanted to open it up for questions as well. We give you just a couple examples here of conclusions you might come to. Employer wants absolutely no investment risk, then you would want a DC plan. I already mentioned that. If employer wants to minimize risk but maintain some level of guaranteed benefit, you might want a hybrid design. And the final one was that if employer was okay with investment risk and the focus is on providing the largest guaranteed benefit, then DB would be the right answer.
Thank you. We're going to just open it up to some questions. Representative Ambrose?
Tim, good evening. Peter Ambrose, District 2. Who sets a realistic investment return assumption rate? Who can we rely upon, especially in today's economy, where I'd love to get a 7.5% interest rate on my savings or my investments? Who in town would set that rate for the plan?
I mean, ultimately, we have to sign off on it. I mean, a couple of things that are important to point out there, that it is a long-term rate. So when we
Say
validate.
long-term, based over how many years?
20 plus at least, usually 30 years. So we're looking at what is achievable. So when we look at like capital market expectations and your current asset mix, we combine those to validate the result, but ultimately the town, in association with the plan's investment advisors, has to come up with what they think they can achieve.
Do you look to other municipalities to assess what rate they're using?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the plan just did an experience study. It looked at a bunch of assumptions, but one of them was the investment return, and there has been a move to drop that down. You were at 8, moved down to 7.75, and as I understand it, there's, might be action to move it 7.5 going forward.
Well, I saw that in the most recent
Right.
contract, yeah, but do you perceive that dropping further in the next year as things, as the economy essentially isn't getting much better?
Well, again, these are long-term averages, expectations. What some municipalities are looking at least I have one client that is looking at, maybe we should use kind of a select and ultimate assumption, one rate for the next 10 years and something thereafter because of current market conditions. And that's really the concern, is that when people look at those assumptions and see 7.5%, I think even investment advisors are not coming up with those results in the short term. But most of them will say over a 30-year period that they are achievable over the long haul.
Thank you.
Any other members? Yes, Representative McCarthy.
Hey, Tim, quick question. On your model, I saw 3 curves converging. You mentioned later on you included, somewhere incorporated a longevity risk, which obviously applies to the defined benefit but not to the contribution. How did you model that in, or did you, or just assume the aggregate they'd be equal and take them out of the equation?
Yeah, in both the defined benefit and the hybrid example that had some pension in it, there was a mortality table that arrived at that present value. So that 509,000 was the present value of that pension using 7.5% investment return, but also with a mortality table built in. So there is that present value has a mortality table that comes up with the 509,000.
Right, but you assumed an average. You didn't assume,
Well, it was, for that purpose, it was a unisex table, a 2012 table with mortality improvement projected out 15 years.
Okay,
So-
but you
so it
didn't
probably-
place in a set-aside for additional risk as a result of it, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, for a display like that, it's a single point in time. That's an average calculation. Probably the implicit life expectancy is probably 20 years past retirement.
okay.
Representative Mottola.
Good evening. John Mottola, District 2. I should know this, but do we have separate police and fire pension funds? They're separate from, they are, okay. And then I take it all the rest of the town employees are in one pension? Okay. Have we ever looked into transferring maybe police or fire or even our town pension fund over to the municipal employment retirement system, which is run by the state? I don't know if we ever looked into that, because I work for a municipality, and at least the fire, which had its own pension, it was a defined benefit pension. They are being transferred over to the MERS, it's called, and I'm assuming that that's going to save the municipality where I work significant money. And I guess my question to you, and maybe that's something to look into, is whether or not that's something that the town of Fairfield has considered. And by your faces, I don't know if you have, but I would recommend that you maybe look at that, because I think that could possibly, depending, I don't know the specifics of our plan, but it could possibly, we could see some short, significant savings now rather than, 15, 20 years down the road if we do some other type of plan. So, and I can talk to you about it after, but it's just something that I think it's worth looking into. And MERS is the municipal employee retirement system where many municipalities participate in, and it's a huge fund. And it is a defined benefit for employees, but I think the municipality gets some benefit because once the employee retires, they're not making any more contributions. That's my understanding on how it works. So at least it's something to look into.
Are all the participants in the plan subject to the... I'm sorry, quick question. If a town joins that specific plan, does the town use the benefits of that plan, or they port their own benefit design?
What my understanding is what happened where I work is that the trustees of the current pension plan, based on actuary calculations, have to transfer a certain amount of money over to the state fund. And then the
Right.
active employees in that plan are now under MERS. And I don't...
But is it the active employees' current design, plan design, or do they switch plan design?
They switch plans. They actually go over into
Yes, they
MERS.
switch plans.
Yeah, the MERS design is fixed, so the town would have no, the town and the employees have no discretion over what the benefit formula is
Right.
or how much the employee contributions are.
Mhm.
So, obviously it would be subject to negotiation
Right.
because there could be a difference in benefits.
And certainly there would have to be union negotiations on something like that. But, and I don't know if it would be a good idea for Faro, but I think it's at least worth looking into. But that's all. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Representative McKenzie.
Mackenzie, District 3. Can you explain to me the treatment of Social Security under the two plans? Is it the same? And I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're, you can get out of a municipality that has its employees participating in a retirement system that meets certain criteria, does not have to pay Social Security for their employees. So if the benefits in a defined benefit plan are rich enough, or the contribution in a defined contribution plan meet a certain level, and I believe it's 7.5% in a defined contribution plan, then they don't have to participate in Social Security, assuming that that's always been the case.
And what is, on defined contribution, are we at 7.5?
Is Mary still here? Well, you currently have a defined benefit plan.
Right, but the proposed, Well, we just proposed
Yeah,
it
we
for
weren't
the nurses,
proposing
for
anything. This
example.
was just an education on the different kinds of plan designs.
what is the plan with the nurses then? Does anybody know?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, but maybe this way.
Apparently you don't pay Social Security if you have a 7.5% contribution by the town. Is
No.
that correct?
That's not quite correct.
Okay.
Everyone in the town currently pays Social Security, right? Except the police and fire. Yeah, so that's what I meant, the town. The town side pays Social Security. All the employees on the town side contribute to Social Security. Employees on the fire and police side do not contribute to Social Security, and I don't think you can opt out of Social Security anymore, can you?
Yeah, no, that's correct. You have to have, there was an election that the town had to make years and years ago that you could assign systems, like in the state of Connecticut, teachers are segregated, so they don't participate in Social Security. A municipality can separate it by groups, and for Fairfield, as Bob pointed out, police and fire do not participate in Social Security, but everybody else does. So, and that's typically why you see higher multipliers for public safety workers.
Yeah, and there's no longer the option of opting out.
Any other members? Representative McCarthy-Vahey, I'll let you ask a question, Representative Palmer. Just, I'm going to have Representative Palmer first, being a member, and then you're next.
Joe Palmer, District 4. Back to the question I asked earlier regarding the 10% of pay. How does that compare? Can you maybe give us some benchmarks? How does that compare with other towns our size? Is that on the high end, low end, average?
It's probably, it's about average. You know, what we usually look at when we're looking at comparables is the multiplier, and then you combine that with other features, things like COLA, retirement age, but then it does, you know, it does boil down to that percentage, but as we pointed out, that percentage varies depending on what you assume for investment return. But based on your multiplier and other things, other factors in your plan's kind of in the middle to high end of the range of richness and benefits, if you want to call it that.
Okay, thank you. And just a few kind of more questions about, to help us benchmark a little bit. The age of retirement is 62. It seems that on most of the town employees in their contracts. Is that pretty standard as well around, are there trends that in moving that up to maybe 65?
There's definitely trends. I mean, actually, the more common trend is retirees are not actually utilizing those provisions. It's fairly common to have even earlier retirement ages in a municipal system. But what we're seeing when we look at the data, and that was part of the recent experience study that was done, we look at when are people going, and the trend of recent has been employees are not retiring at 62, they're going to 65, 67, so they're retiring later and later. So even if you know, that could be an instant where you change your provision, but it really doesn't have much of a cost impact because people aren't, even though it might appear rich, people aren't utilizing that particular aspect of the plan, so you wouldn't actually achieve much cost savings.
Gotcha, thank you. And I guess the last question, the mandatory contribution, I know we factor in 4% with most of the contracts. I heard 6% going around as well. Are we required, I know it's a negotiation with our unions, but you know, 4%, is that also pretty standard? You know,
Yeah, and that's another thing where when we would look at comparables, you usually tie that to your multiplier. So a town with a lower multiplier might have a lower employee contribution. So what I could say relative to your plan specifically, where your multiplier falls in the range of what we see out there in average town multipliers, and where your employee contributions, the multipliers towards the higher end, the employee contributions are towards the lower end.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Representative Ryan.
Bruce Ryan, District 10. I want to follow up a little bit on Dave's question about Social Security. I'm looking at this current nurses plan. It says that they'll be under a new plan. These are new hires for nurses, correct?
Correct.
All right, so they're going to be required to put in 4%. The town's going to match a minimum of 4%. Will those people will we have to pay Social Security for them?
Yeah, as we pointed out, you pay on all town employees other than police and fire.
So the town's 4% is going to be something like 11%. Another 7%, roughly 7.5%.
It's 6.2. Everyone, even non-Social Security, now pay. If you're hired after April 1st, '86, you pay into Medicare. So Medicare is the additional 1.6 that everyone pays.
So there's no benefit for new hires to change to a 401A plan in terms of
again, the election was a long time ago, so for all town employees, your Social Security, you know, using that 10%, the employees in the DB plan are in Social Security, so you're paying the 6.2 for them too.
Okay.
So moving to a DC, the 6.2 is paid for them either way. The thing that's changing is the town-sponsored plan it would move from, the 10% roughly cost of a DB plan to whatever the DC plan cost.
Okay. So if you were to just move this over now to police and fire, which are not in the Social Security system, and a contract for them was designed under a 401A plan, the town would not have to contribute to Social Security for them because of the election at some point, where they never made that election?
Assuming they continued to meet the requirements of providing a rich enough benefit to have the exemption.
And what is that, 7.5%?
It's 7.5%, yeah.
Okay.
But
Well,
that gets you out of doing the 6.2.
I think for people who are trying to sit here and assess whether, a move to a defined contribution plan, 401A, 401K plan, which the corporate world has adopted in the last 20 or 30 years, and municipalities are just looking at and starting to make that change over, it's important to realize that the Social Security aspect is a big factor. If you can't do away with that, then it's still going to cost the town a lot of money to make that change on the town employee side. Now, on the police and fire side, when we're trying to assess, is this a good contract or not a good contract, the fact that we won't have to make that contribution, that's a current cost every year that's significant. So that it would make a lot of sense to understand all these little factors. That's why I'm asking that.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments. One, obviously on the corporate side, the private side, also those people are paying Social Security also.
That's correct.
But I think one of the takeaways here is when a town switches to make a BC plan optional or switching new employees into a BC plan, there is no immediate impact. There is no immediate savings. In fact, when Mr. Flynn reviewed the presentation initially, we actually didn't say that, and he said, hey, you ought to throw that in there. There's no immediate savings, because you still have the current population that's getting, that the town is paying the cost of their plan, their benefits, et cetera. And now you have the new employees coming in under the DC plan, and if you remember the graph on page 13, the yellow line in the early years is higher than the blue line. So in other words, the contributions for the DC plan in the early years are higher than the contributions to the DB plan. So switching from a DB to a DC is not saving the town money. If the RTM is focused on savings, then you got to go to reducing or eliminating the COLA, or go to reducing the multiplier. In other words, instead of paying people 2.275 times every year, you got to pay them 2.2 or 1.8 or something. That's the way to have immediate impact. That's the only way to have immediate savings.
That's clear, and I think that's important for people to understand that. But one of the other big factors I think most concerns everyone in this world is unfunded liabilities. And the unfunded liability is a function of having a defined benefit plan, where it would not be a function of having a defined contribution plan. So 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, if there was a migration to a defined contribution plan, 401K, whatever, the town would be, and it was explicit in your slide as well, and that's I think the main concern of most people, and because a lot of the assumptions that you're making have certainly not borne out over the last 10 or 12 years. We've had zero growth in people's stock portfolios. 7.5 is, it's going to take another 10 years for them to catch up to, and that's assuming a double return. So these are the kinds of things that we don't want to let. I know that I sit here and I think, my children or grandchildren, I don't want them subject to this issue of unfunded liabilities, which is rampant, not just potentially in the town, but the state and everywhere else. And moving to a defined contribution plan, we can begin to cure that. That's something that we all, I think, should look at. Thank you.
Any other members? Representative Brogan.
Chris Brogan, District 6. If you look at the, for example, in the nurses' contract, and you look at the difference between what we would have paid for the new hires under the defined benefit plan and what we're paying under the defined contribution, is the assumption that if you put the amount in defined contribution and all the investment assumptions and longevity and all those assumptions that go into your long-term calculations come true, that the person ends up at age 62 with the same net present value of the retirement amount. In other words, is the employee theoretically in the same position either way?
No. I mean, because you can't pay 10% versus 5.8, and if you earn the 10% has built into it the 7.5% return. Now, there's some other complexity in there, as we pointed out, with disability benefits and all that, but if you ignore that, and you say the one plan costs 10%, which means if you accumulated 10% of pay, earned 7.5%, that would fully fund that benefit. Well, if now you only pay 5.8, or what, I forget what the number was. Maybe that was the savings, and you're only paying 4%. If you're only paying 4% now, I guess, yeah, the extra was for the separate disability insurance. So maybe it's comparing 8 to 4%, but you can't. You were paying 8, you're now paying 4. You're not going to accumulate to the same benefit.
But the employee is taking the 4, investing it presumably under the same returns as your assumptions for the town.
Right. The town was investing 8. The
Okay.
employee is now
So
investing
it's-
4. If they both earn 7.5, you can't get back to this. You can't pay less and have the same result.
Right. So that chart where everything met it.
That was an example to compare. That was not your plan. That was a hypothetical design where the 3 designs are designed to do what you're describing, to be
Right.
equivalent.
Okay.
My understanding is, that wasn't the intent of the.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, to make ours equivalent, obviously, the town's contribution to the defined contribution plan would have to be 4.4% higher.
Yeah, I guess put simply, you can't have equivalent benefits and save money.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to end questions. I think Selectman McCarthy-Vahey had a comment or a question. You've been patiently waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kristen McCarthy-Vahey, actually Representative Brogan, basically asked essentially what I was going to. So my comment would be, essentially, we're looking at unfunded liability issues, but also want to make sure that we're looking at it from the employee perspective as well. And certainly, the assumption, from what I'm hearing for you, if we're making a 7.5% return assumption for our pension fund, you're then saying that it's also a 7.5% return assumption for the employee investing in their own 401k.
Yes.
Is that a correct statement?
Well, I mean, that's only relevant to the extent you're comparing. So if you were trying to do a comparative analysis from the employee standpoint, to tell the employees, all right, we're changing your benefit, what are you going to get out of this DC compared to the DB? You want to compare apples to apples. So, you could compare them both at 7%. I mean, it's just, the lower you assume, the more costly the DB plan is.
Sure. And the other question I had actually was in terms of fees. And was there any comparison of fee structure for what it costs are fee-wise for the defined benefit versus the defined contribution, and any fees that the employee would bear in a defined contribution plan? What were the assumptions there?
Yeah, we didn't. I mean, it was kind of a generic presentation, but we did make note of, typically how that's handled in a defined contribution plan is the fees are spread out over the investment return, so it tends to drag down the investment return, where now you explicitly pay, any fees out of the trust.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the report. I want to leave with one final question, and that is essentially, thank you for doing this for us. I think it was an education, certainly. I think in the end, what we want to look at by contract is, is this contract more costly, or what are the costs of each contract? And I know you said specifically you can't give numbers for each one right now, but are there any lessons learned from the town here? Was this helpful for the town to do? For you, Mr. Mayor, for the first selectman? Is this going to allow you to look at contracts coming up and look at the different possibilities? I mean, is there anything gained for the town We gained in education. We have questions. You see there's a lot of different possibilities here. Did you guys gain anything? Going forward, that will be helpful? Because I think that was the whole point of doing this, in addition to educating us.
I think, and when you say that the town gains something, that has to be not just myself or the First Selectman or the RTM, it has to be the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance as well. I mean, I think the simplest and kind of the most boring and repetition part of this presentation is the pros and cons, because each one is the flip side of the other. And so you have the issues. How much money do you want to spend? How much do you want to reward your employees? Are we worried about employee retention? Are we worried about employee recruitment? And evaluate those decisions and then come to a conclusion. I think what a lot of towns did, and I think Fairfield did the same thing, I wasn't here, but I think what a lot of towns did when the market tanked, when everybody saw their ARC going way up, said, oh my God, what do we do? And the what do we do is the corporate world does 401ks, so let's do 401as. Now, let's take a policeman, for example. Let's say that you hire a policeman. And you hire a policeman under, and let's say the town of Fairfield had a defined contribution plan. Well, in the early years, that policeman would get the benefit of that defined benefit plan, defined contribution plan, having a greater town contribution than a defined benefit plan. But then a couple years later, he can take that money out. We've trained him, we've recruited him, and he starts thinking about safety and longevity and long-term. Then maybe he might want to, it becomes more attractive to him to move to another town to get the advantage of a defined benefit plan. So there's a multiple, so for me personally, it was very informative, it was very educational, and I feel, that the decisions, though, need to be held. Personally, I think the hybrid is the best way to go. You have you reduce the volatility, you reduce the longevity risk, you reduce the COLA risk, you reduce the investment risk, but at the same time, you're providing the employee with those things, guaranteed return, guaranteed longevity, and a little bit of COLA.
Thank you.